is about 30 minutes drive north of Auckland in the North Island of New Zealand. Hang on, we just need to... I'll tell you a little bit about Cameron. Cameron is nearly 15. He has, unfortunately, a 12-year-long obsession with one of Australia's greatest exports, the Wiggles. Yeah. I have every Wiggles book and CD ever published, and I'm hoping that he grows out of that shortly. Cameron's my height, and as you can see, he is slim. He has fantastic language, but is hopeless at basic stuff like finding his shoes, etc. But he wakes up every morning happy, and he's extremely affectionate. The key issues of Prader-Willi syndrome for Cameron are not around food, but around anxiety. He's definitely interested in food. He never asks for a second serving though. He never tells me he's hungry, but he is highly opportunistic given an opportunity, and will nab any food left out for him. We have, through the wonders of a friend of ours that designs airport security, a walk-in scullery, pantry at our home with electromagnets on either side that join together, and a little finger scanner about the size of your average light switch. And I put my finger on it and it locks the door, and unless your fingerprint opens the door, you can't get into it. So of course Cameron's fingerprints are not going to ever be loaded on to our cupboard of food, but it has enabled us to have great food security and total peace of mind that if the walk-in pantry is locked, that he has zero access to food. So for us, food security has been one of the easiest things to control. Living with his anxiety and some of his autistic style behaviours are a lot more challenging. Cameron is currently engaged. BJ, do you want to make a note? Cameron's currently engaged to Liesl. Liesl is 19 and she has Down syndrome. Liesl's organised the engagement, somewhat to the horror of Sophie, who also has Down syndrome and is 17 and was engaged to Cameron last month. Liesl has banned Cameron from talking to Sophie. Sophie is broken-hearted and Cameron is oblivious to all of it, accepting his status as a manly stud with total ease. Just a disclaimer, I'm not standing here because I have all of the answers or most of the answers, or some days I'm not sure I have any answers at all. But my family and I are journeying down a road that many of you are on as well, and we go down our dead-end streets and the car breaks down on the side of the road, and sometimes my driving is terrible. And you guys all have the same journey. So sometimes I think that one of the great benefits of meeting together like this is recognising that you're not alone and being in a community of people that struggle with the same strange things that go on in your homes. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my journey. In the beginning, Cameron is our second child, and he was born via C-section 9 a.m. one Wednesday morning in February 2004. So after a normal but fetally inactive pregnancy, out popped a squalling, red-faced, indignant 6-pound baby. I have hyperemesis through all of my pregnancies, so I was just vastly relieved not to be pregnant anymore and for the vomiting to stop. And I was kind of disappointed, to be honest, that Cameron was a boy, because I'd really been hoping for a daughter. I already had a son. And I often think back to that immediate sense of disappointment about his gender and rue my innocence, because I didn't know then that I had bigger things to worry about. After achieving top scores on his APGAR test, possibly the only test Cameron will ever ace, Cameron went to sleep immediately, and he stayed asleep, but nothing to worry about at this point. About 12 hours later, it was around 9 o'clock at night, my husband and my mum had both left the hospital to go home. Cameron's skin was developing a little mild yellow tinge. He still slept and he hadn't eaten, and showed great disinterest in feeding or crying or moderating his own temperature. So they moved him from my room to the NICU. We'll just take him and warm him up, they said. Well, I just had major abdominal surgery and was doped out on morphine and tramadol and all the good things that they like to give you. And there didn't seem any cause for concern. He just needed to wake up and feed. But an hour later, a paediatrician who I later came to have the utmost affection and care for, but at the time was a total stranger, appeared in my room and said to me, "Your baby has some challenges." "Oh, I know," I airily announced through my morphine haze. "They've just taken him to warm him up." "No," he gently persisted, "he has some challenges." "Oh, challenges." Turns out Dr. Sang is the master of understatement. There followed 4 weeks in the NICU, poking and prodding and countless tests. The NICU at this hospital was new and all the other babies were preemies. And they were tiny, scrawny little mites that needed to grow more and learn how to independently feed. Well, that's all Cameron needed too, I thought. Looking back, I do remember the nurses looking at me with what I can only now describe as pity. And at the time I flagged it in the back of my mind, but I didn't really process it. Everything was fine. This was a minor roadblock. Cameron just needed to grow a bit and start feeding, and then we'd be away home. It wasn't until many months later, as I look back through the photos of him in his early days and months, that I realised how very unusual he looked in his first few weeks, hence the pity from the nurses. I couldn't see it then, thank goodness. I don't think this was because the misty-eyed state of adoring new motherhood, as much as that my mind couldn't or wouldn't process what was happening then. Denial is useful sometimes. I remember one of my worst moments being in those early days was being discharged from hospital 5 days after Cameron was born, and I'd gone to hospital to have a baby, and here I was going home without one. And I drove home, and a very dear friend of mine was cleaning my house, God bless her, and I couldn't even face her. I sat in the car and cried, which was my first time I cried. 4 weeks after he was born, Cameron came home too, and I envied those mothers who had demanding middle of the night wake-up calls from their crying babies, because he just slept and slept and slept. He was on an apnea monitor that he delighted in wriggling around and setting off, and every time the monitor went off, I lost about a year off my life, and he was always fine breathing. In the end, we removed the monitor entirely, deciding we couldn't live like this. The first of many decisions made where we drew a line and said enough. Cameron was tested for many things during his stay at the NICU, and at the time there was a consultant at Starship in Auckland, Dr. Salim Aftimos. He was good, he was really good. All the other children born at the hospital, he diagnosed them on site, presumably because of their dysmorphic features, etc. Well, he looked at Cameron 3 days after birth and said it was definitely not Prader-Willi syndrome. So on they went. I think the blood tests went away for fish studies, etc., but they take some time to come. It was definitely not Prader-Willi syndrome, said the lab too. And of course, at the same time, Cameron, being about 6 weeks old by now, was starting to wake up. And by 7 or 8 weeks, still with no diagnosis, he was growing and waving his arms and legs around and progressing. He was fed by an NG tube for 4 months. But with no positive results in any of the tests, the doctors started to think and talk about a family syndrome. So I was born early myself. I was born small. I was tube fed for 3 weeks when I was born, disinterested in eating as a baby. Cameron had long fingers and a big head. I have long fingers. My husband has a big head, literally and metaphorically. Cam was developing, and they thought, well, maybe he'll just grow out of it. Nothing else was fitting. Well, this sounded great to me, but obviously the medical team went back to the drawing board and thought, it's not really an explanation. So they retested, amongst other things, at 4 months of age for Prader-Willi syndrome, and discovered that the original test from the lab was faulty. Someone had read it wrong. It wasn't a no, it was a yes. So at 4.5 months old, we had Prader-Willi syndrome. And of course, not knowing anything about it, we looked at Google. Big mistake. Our future evaporated before our eyes, displaced by images of being held hostage in the kitchen by a large child demanding donuts. It's not fair. So The genetics consultant advised us that Cameron had some very rare method of getting Prader-Willi. He has UPD, but apparently some other strange mechanism that Dr. Driscoll would understand, but I certainly don't. And he said to us that we had a 1 in a million chance of having a baby like Cameron. Great, I said. Some people win the lottery with a 1 in a million chance, and this is what we get. So it's not fair, said my inner 3-year-old, and I haven't 15 years later got an answer to my inner 3-year-old. It's not fair. It's not what any of us want. Which takes me to the club that I never wanted to join. Nobody asks for PWS, but with nature's accidental pairing of 2 chromosomes, life takes a turn on a roller coaster in a direction you didn't plan. When Cameron was about 5 months old, we made our first foray into the world of special needs parent groups when the New Zealand Prader-Willi Association, that Linda was leading at the time, held a weekend for young families. I was an extremely reluctant participant, yet strangely and desperately compelled to attend something I knew would be confronting, painful and terrifying, like a moth maybe drawn toward a flame that it knows will burn its wings, or me going to the dentist. But there I met a group of incredible Kiwi families who were normal people. Well, like normal's a relative term in our communities, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But we were strangely abnormal together. They still smiled and laughed, and the connections we made then with families on the same mad journey have been both enduring and sustaining. We don't always talk a lot, or even that regularly as our children get older, but there's a sense of honesty and understanding between us. That's really important because you guys are the only people that really understand what living with this syndrome is like. So find your people. Your friends and family may be magnificent and they will certainly try their best, but until they have been the one asked for the gazillionth time what time lunch is, or witnessed a thermonuclear meltdown because more screen time is ruled out of the question, they won't really understand. So I call Prader-Willi death by 1,000 paper cuts, which was an ancient form of torture to kill someone with many, many cuts. We're all familiar with the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Fair to say we've probably all been through quite a few of these. And having a child with a disability brings grief, but not the finality of grief caused by a death, for example. You try, and through your grief, remind yourself that your child is alive and well, that you're lucky to have them. I'd look at my sister whose teenage boy died in a car crash and think, well, Cam's alive, you know, I can't complain. But actually that's what the grief is about. I do have him, and it's hard for him, and it's hard for us. And I don't want him every day, to be completely honest. And we do our best to love him unconditionally, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that some days I really didn't like him very much at all. And I really struggle to remind myself of just how lucky I am. So living grief, or ambiguous grief, is grieving for someone still alive and for all that you thought that they would be. Dr. Ken Moses writes that parents generate core level dreams for their children even before the child is born, and disability shatters those dreams. Grieving is a process where parents separate from those shattered dreams and begin making new dreams. So it's a different kind of grief than what we feel when someone dies, because it's ongoing and it's not final. So, and we fear the unknown more than we fear the known. We find ourselves grieving for things we didn't even know we thought about. I was on the couch and Cameron was 6 months old, and I'm crying for the fact he won't bring me a grandchild, and that he'll never get to be a parent. And I'm grieving because he won't graduate from university. Not things I even thought about with my other babies, but it's a slow and painful reorientation of our hopes and dreams, and it doesn't stop. So find people you can be honest with. Your friends may or may not understand, as hard as they will try. Keep your marriage or your relationship strong, and stay in touch with your friends. Get help if you need it, or if the people closest to you that you trust think that you need it. Oops. Oh. I love this photo. two little boys, and one of them looks really strange. Cameron's the one in the orange. The other strange little guy is the son of my best friend, and he's the same age as Cameron, which has been a source of such pain at unexpected times. He actually doesn't look strange anymore, but I still love the photo. Comparison is the enemy of contentment, yeah? I've mostly stopped comparing Cameron to others. I've built up a hard skin to what kids his age are doing, but almost 15 years in, comparison has the power to knife me in the guts at the most unexpectedly random moments. Seeing a small baby the other day chortling at his mum in a cafe and remembering that Cameron wasn't like that, or seeing a 15-year-old boy clowning around turning somersaults as he jumps off the bridge into the water and thinking, he's the same age as Cam, and Cam can't do that. Cameron played touch rugby for a few years, and in the end I found it heartbreaking to watch him trying so hard and failing so spectacularly. Not that he was aware of this. He thought that he was 6 foot and bulletproof and the All Blacks were his next stop. But Cameron wasn't the only one that failed at touch rugby. I failed too, because I failed to stop comparing him to the other kids, and it made me crazy, and I couldn't actually watch it anymore. We were just talking about living grief, and for me the grief comes when I compare Cameron to others. A very wise woman said to me many years ago that comparison is the enemy of contentment. We're happy with our house, our car, our shoes, until we see someone else's house or car or shoes, and suddenly our house, car and shoes don't seem quite as good as they did before. If I measure Cameron against his own very realistic bar, then that's a lot healthier than when I measure him against his typically developing friends or family members of a similar age. So it's really important not to measure them. This is in honour of Cameron, because that way to the dark side leads, says Yoda. In the context of mindfulness, there's a description of a mental state of being which is called monkey mind. This can be described as a state when we're unsettled, restless, capricious, fanciful, inconstant, confused, indecisive, uncontrollable, often all at the same time. When we have a child with Prader-Willi syndrome, our mind doesn't have a chance to pause very often. You are on 24/7. There's so much that you need to do. They have a vast array of needs that can't be ignored and can't be deferred, from doctor's meetings to meetings with the school to tiptoeing through the minefield of their own emotions and demands. Well, it doesn't stop. And in addition to that, we have our other children to care for, a marriage to develop and maintain, and there's the dog, the cat, and the bloody laundry. We often have full or part-time jobs to hold down, and before we've actually finished this list, the list begins to spontaneously regenerate. More laundry, anyone? Mm-hmm. And we get sucked up by the gravity of our own world and begin to spin. Well, maybe that's just me. Our brains are one giant self-perpetuating to-do list. Anyway, this is how I experience monkey mind. I want to stop, but I can't, because if I stop, then the freight train behind me will catch up. So we keep moving. But the truth is, if we don't stop, not just slow down, but actually stop and allow ourselves to stop, this freaking Prader-Willi thing will kill us. So we have to take a pause, otherwise we'll drown. We need to take sabbaticals, otherwise they'll take us. And the sabbatical that takes us won't be the good Hawaiian holiday kind of sabbatical. It will be the ulcer or the hole in the ground type. So we need to take moments in our day and our lives where we stop thinking so that our minds can rest and repair. I'm not very good at this. Some people achieve it through meditation, through mindfulness, through prayer, through sport, through a hobby. Whatever way you find mindfulness, jump into it. I was going to tell you a Cameronism. Cameron was meeting with the senior mental health consultant in Auckland at Child Mental Health Services. This was about his skin picking, which was out of control. So the senior consultant, who sadly had never seen a patient with Prader-Willi syndrome, Cameron took his shoes off and he looked at the skin picking on his feet, which were raw and oozing, and he was shocked. And we had several consultations with this senior psychiatrist, and after the second, I think, toward the end of that, Cameron was lolling in an armchair. He had his legs across it, and he was sort of lying back like this. And he said to the very senior consultant, "So why do children with Prader-Willi pick their skin?" And this very senior consultant gave him a very senior consultant-like explanation about why it happened. Fairly technical. Cameron paused at the end of it and then said to him, "So you don't really know either then?" Astrophysics and Prader-Willi syndrome. A black hole can be described as being a massive gravitational field that pulls everything into it, destroys it and spits it out the other side. It is the result of a collapsing sun. The gravity is so strong that not even light can escape. I think if you look up PWS in the dictionary, you might find a similar definition. Prader-Willi syndrome, or your child with Prader-Willi syndrome, cannot become the sun that the other planets orbit around. The child with Prader-Willi is one planet in a family solar system, but we can't make them the centre. So in our family, we have other planets that we need to keep away from the black hole. Connor is our 18-year-old introverted academic, and Jazz, our youngest, is a 12-year-old needy extrovert. The name of the game is not to let Prader-Willi syndrome be the centre of the solar system, and to be mindful of mitigating the effects of Prader-Willi on our other two children. This is not an easy task. It's not easy. It's true that many families have a challenging child and that many parents worry about that child A will ruin child B, so our experience isn't unique in that regard. But what is arguably unique is the intensity and the unpredictability of the Prader-Willi experience. Cameron's nearly 15 years old, and much of the conflict we have with him relates to his high anxiety and the wonderful traits of autism, plus the ubiquitous food seeking. And so our other children see behaviour that most children would not, and they have restrictions placed on their life that other children don't, because our Prader-Willi child can't cope with going to the mall or waiting for a restaurant to serve the meal, or sitting at a different seat in the car, or any other number of activities. And our non-PWS children have to navigate a treacherous journey of how they sort through having a weird brother when friends come around, and when their love for him struggles with their sometimes embarrassment about him. They have to figure out when to stand up for him, when to defend him, and when to pretend they don't know him. They have to develop their own relationship with food in a home where the fridge and pantry are routinely locked, and I worry about my daughter having an eating disorder because of her unnatural relationship with food. And for 15 years we have consistently just tried to summon the strength to push back against the black hole of Prader-Willi and say, this far and no further, because becoming a victim is seductive, and I'm sure we all know parents who are victims, but our other two children may well be left with the responsibility of looking after Cameron once we're gone. And for that simple perspective alone, we need to arm them and prepare them and protect them as much as possible, so that when the time comes for them to take him, be responsible for him, they've still got some gas left in the tank to do it. I swear that parenting is about blackmail and guilt. Early on in your journey with Prader-Willi, or indeed any challenging health or disability, you discover, thanks to Uncle Google and a range of well-intentioned friends, doctors, therapists, and the occasional nut job, that there are always new things that you could do. Emerging treatments, alternative theories, more this, less that, try this, do that. Someone suggested to me when Cameron was 4 that it would be very beneficial to him if I homeschooled him, as the school environment would be challenging for him. No, thank you. That might be great for Cameron, but it would not be great for me. So find your balance and find your own pace and try the things that really resonate with you, and let the others fall away, And don't feel bad about it, because you can't do everything. Cliches and platitudes. How people have encouraged us on our journey with Prader-Willi syndrome. I try really hard now when I have a friend, colleague or family member who's suffered a loss or a disappointment or bereavement not to reach for a platitude. They come so readily and they may well be heartfelt, but anyone in a time of crisis will already have heard it a gazillion times. I mean, honestly and truly, people mean well, they really do. And often they don't know what to say, but they feel they should say something. But seriously, the platitudes. Here are some of our favourites. This too shall pass. I'm not sure when. God only gives you what he knows you can carry. You're so strong, I couldn't do what you're doing. You'll all have heard this one. Just ask if you need anything, you know where I am. Boy, have I got a deal for you. And my personal favourite, only very special parents get these very special children. Seriously, in the early years with Cameron, I thought if one more overly sympathetic person told me in a syrupy voice that only very special children get these very special babies, I was going to shove my very special baby right down their throat. But words that did make a difference to us is a dear friend who had an adult child with a disability said to me, "This child will bring you joy." I didn't believe him at the time, but he was right. Oh, am I going backwards? How to keep your friends. We have, through the distorting life lens of PWS, discovered not only much about ourselves, but also a lot about those around us. And will sometimes, perhaps more often than we care to admit, look at our friends with envy and resentment and general dissatisfaction at how easily life appears to be panning out for them. And when they complain about the waitress or how tired they are or how their child did not, for example, get into the top sporting team, or is having a very minor delay in learning to read, or they moan about how badly behaved their normal child is, and what a challenge they are to parent, or how they just don't have time to do anything once they've been to the gym and had their nails done. Well, let's just say my capacity to be empathetic towards their challenges is sometimes limited. And this is a problem, because it's easy to feel that our load is heavier than theirs, and I do, to be honest, sometimes think that I would trade places with them in a heartbeat. But the I'm having a bad day perception that everyone else's grass is greener than yours, and that I have a superior right to complain because most of their challenges seem minor in comparison, doesn't take me to a healthy place. So sometimes, to be honest, I've found myself sitting at a cafe listening to a friend download their issues and struggling to care that their child has chicken pox while my child has Prader-Willi syndrome, and desperately wanting to say to them, would you like to swap? Don't ever say that, because this isn't helpful for relationship. And the truth is, we do have a heavy load, and some days it's suffocatingly heavy. But the truth is also that our friends have their own problems and challenges and find them suffocatingly heavy as well, even if we don't think they are. And the other truth is that we still need their friendship, and they need ours, and they really can't understand what the load is like. They can't understand the loss and the grief and the just ongoing nature of it. They'll never understand the mind-bending intricacies of PWS, but they do understand us, that we're humans and we're their friend and that we need their help and we need them. So fight for your friendships and bite your tongue. Oops, oh, what have I done? What have I done? Cameronisms. Cam was driving in the car with me a few months ago. I think I was in a grump about something possibly, but he was sitting in the front seat, and he has a habit of being very, very affectionate at times. And he put his hand over and he rubbed me on the shoulder, and he looked at me with a look that wouldn't have been out of place and at the end of some romantic comedy, and he said, "Mum, one day you're going to be a really good mother." From the beginning in our family, we've had a policy of inclusion. So whatever the family and the other kids were doing, then Cameron would do it too. And this worked pretty well when the kids were small, and it meant that we could push Cam to achieve things that he may not otherwise have done. We taught him how to ride a scooter. Riding a bike was far too challenging because he could pedal or steer, but not both at the same time. He played touch rugby. He's learnt to swim. We take him on the boat. He's learnt to boogie board, and he even has stood up on a surfboard a few times. But as he's got older, the challenges have become more complex. He wanted to snow ski desperately, and he was convinced that he could. He nailed it on the protected confines of the local artificial ski slope in Auckland, but the mountain itself was a total sensory overload for him. Though he did, somewhat entertainingly, manage to ski right down the beginner's slope into an early morning meeting of ski instructors and wiped 6 of them out like a row of dominoes. But the epic meltdown that followed saw us sitting in the snow with him for an hour as he sobbed uncontrollingly. So skiing was off the table. Currently, he desperately wants to wakeboard or water ski like his sister and brother, and he wants to do a pull-up on the pull-up bars like Dad. It's just not really possible for him, but in his mind it is. But these activities are really just a metaphor for the many ambitions that Cameron has that are beyond him. And BJ, you were asking about family, about why don't people with Prader-Willi understand they can't have children, and maybe it's because their parents can't bear to tell them.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the case. So like most people, as a child, I was taught that lying was a bad thing, not to say I didn't try it occasionally. But we learnt that white lies were sometimes okay. Yes, your ass does look small in those pants. But that an outright lie would land you in a fiery pit, or purgatory, as my Catholic husband calls it. Prader-Willi is a bit of a game changer when it comes to lying. We have to lie to Cam on a daily basis, in fact many, many times each day, to protect him from events that he can't participate in, protect him from situations that are just too complex for him to navigate, and protect him from situations that would see him at risk, and sometimes to protect the world of our other children, and protect him from having his very, very tender heart broken and losing all his ambition and all his own self-belief. And we've had to educate our other children about lying. Disturbingly, my daughter is a natural liar and has had plenty of opportunity to perfect this on her brother. I'd go as far as to say she's quite gifted. So we've had to teach her when it's okay to lie, for example, to protect Cameron, and when it's not okay, yes, Mum, I did take that money from your purse. When we have people around us that live in a very black and white world and want to have a very black and white perspective, we have to take a deep breath and remind ourselves that the lie that they told themselves is only to keep their own world safe, much like ours, I suppose. My Irish mother-in-law would say to me, "Sufficient unto the day are the problems thereof." And this is probably my biggest piece of advice for new families with Prader-Willi syndrome. I worked out really early on that if I started worrying about the future, I couldn't manage the present. So just think about today's troubles. I can assure you that you won't run out. Why dogs are man's best friend? We have, as mentioned, a bit on our plate. So when I suggested to my husband that we got a puppy, he wasn't very impressed. It's not that he doesn't like dogs, he does. He had one as a child, but he said, "I just don't want to be responsible for another living thing." So the kids and I mounted a quiet, subversive campaign to soften him up to dogs. But as is often the case with husbands, when someone else told him it was a good idea, suddenly it was a good idea. So we have a dog now. This is Frankie. She's a slightly mad miniature schnauzer that loves nothing more than her daily run on the beach, and she has brought us immeasurable joy because she loves each of us in a different way. She lets my very introverted 18-year-old express gentleness, and she gives our youngest the endless attention that she craves. And to our Prader-Willi son, she gives him the opportunity for him to give his simple love, and she lets him have the experience of thinking he's in charge. Yes. The taxi comes to bring him home from school and toots as it comes down the road, and Frankie immediately jumps to attention and runs to the door, and she waits for him, and Cameron comes in and bends over and he says, "Hello, my darling, how are you?" And she's slower with him, she's more affectionate toward him, and she's protective of him. And maybe she's learnt that from watching us, but I think that's just dogs. So yes, as a pup she weed all over the place and got into the rubbish bins, and she's always on the lookout for a sly snack. Does that sound familiar? But she's brought laughter and love in little pockets of our day. But perhaps the biggest thing is that she's given Cameron a social entree that he didn't have before. We live at the beach, so Frankie walks the beach regularly. Well, not so much walks, but runs around like an idiot sniffing other dogs' bottoms. But Cam walks with Frankie on the beach too, and dog owners being what they are, they stop to let the dogs meet each other and they chat. And Cam confidently tells them that his dog's called Frankie, and he asks them what their dog is called and what type of dog they are, and they chat. And through this, he's developed a community of people that otherwise would not have paid him an iota of attention. And he loves to walk the beach, and there's people that he knows, and they stop and they talk to him. And for a teenager with Prader-Willi syndrome, Frankie has brought him this very rare gift. A small piece of advice, don't lock up your cucumbers. Food obsession in Prader-Willi does not extend to cucumbers, sweet potatoes or broccoli. Also your homemade peanut butter flavoured bliss balls. Safe to leave those on the bench too. Doing drugs. When Cameron was born, the New Zealand government was one of the few in the OECD that didn't fund growth hormone treatment for children with Prader-Willi. Australia was one of the other few. And we joined the New Zealand Association in their fight to change government, and we finally got there. Growth hormone treatment has been fabulous for Cam to mitigate the effects of Prader-Willi. It's not a cure, but it's helped him be tall and lean with better muscle function and anecdotally better cognitive outcomes, so I really wonder sometimes about this. Cameron's also on fluoxetine for his anxiety, and he's just started testosterone to push him through puberty, and all of these drugs help him. For me, my drug of choice is an early morning walk on the beach or coffee with a friend, a 5 p.m. gin and tonic, and seeing as my husband's not there I can tell you this, some retail therapy. These drugs help me mitigate the effects of Prader-Willi syndrome. So find your drug of choice. It might be nature or the ocean waves or dinner with friends or a new pair of shoes, but find what gives you your fix. And lastly, this is Cam. Prader-Willi syndrome is what he has, it's not what he is. He's a beach-loving, crazy-walking, wiggles-obsessed water baby. He loves going fast, which is ironic given his gangling, bumbly body. He swims, he rides a horse, he runs and he surfs, all of them very badly, but with total commitment. And there are so many things that he does not do that so many people are quick to point out. But what he does do is that he wakes up every morning happy again, and he's content in his world. And if I could wish one single thing for my children, happiness would be it. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Karen.